Specific to Northwest Wad Country, the Wad Country program brought to you by Sportco and Fife and Outdoor Emporium in Seattle. Everything you see in front of us here, Duane.
Yes, sir.
You can pick it up at Sportco at the best prices, warehouse pricing. It's the best place to go. Here's the reason number one is because of that, but number two is because the people who work there can actually kind of help you pick that stuff up.
They can, and if you go in there and you can't find it, go to the fishing counter and ask them. It may have run out, or it may be back in the warehouse, or they may be waiting for it to get in there. But either way, last time we did a pro cam, a couple weeks ago, we sent folks there, and they were having trouble finding some stuff. So some of this Bomac stuff is new, and it is on the shelves. It's just a matter if you get there before everybody else. So, Joel, there are, and this is just a small display of a handful of floats that you have options to utilize, and for different techniques. Excuse me. And, it's depending on how you want to fish, I guess, is where you start. So I aligned a handful of different methods here today, and we'll just quickly run down them. Now, I can tell you that the new Bobber Dog floats by Momac, they come in two sizes. You're going to notice, unlike their other floats, there's nothing marked on
There's no marking, no.
that says size or weight or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as crucial because we're not trying to get these floats to stand up on end. It's not a weighted float in a vertical presentation. We're dragging the weight. So that float is naturally going to lay down and travel downriver. The reason it's cut off flat in the back is because the top of the float, actually, if you're fishing it appropriately, is pointing downriver, and the water is pushing on the backside. That's why you have a nice big surface area to allow for that water to push. Now, I can tell you this larger, and that's basically how they broke it down, big and small or large and medium. You want to drag that 6-inch stick lead, that little doggy stick lead, with this larger float. For bobber dogging, it's going to work fantastic as we get to lower clear conditions. If you're listening when we're talking with Josiah and, of course, Mike Ainsworth, we anticipate the water's continuing to drop. Going to get to be low clear conditions. Nothing wrong with switching to the smaller float, and I know these will work very well, and you don't have to waste your time and money cutting the 6-inch lead. Pick yourself up a box or two of the 3 or 4-inch or even the 5, and just go ahead and fish those and use appropriate size of weight for those floats. Bobber dogging, those setups right there, depending on bigger water, smaller water, going to work fantastic. Now, another float that Bomac came out with this year is this finesse float, which is a clear plastic straight-through tube that has a long tube. Now, guys often say, well, why do I need to fish that style of float with a jig? If you think about it, if you fish a slip float, and I'll talk about that in a minute, it does work. There have been many a fish, both salmon and steelhead, caught with slip floats with jigs underneath them. The thing about the finesse float, that tube that elongates down into the water column actually imparts more action on that jig. If you think about how that pendulum's back and forth, as the surface tension of the water knocks that float back and forth, it causes that tail to swing a little bit, and that creates more movement on your jig, which eradicates interest and gets those steelhead to strike. So now the thing you need to think about this float, in that if you're making it so that it slips, you can fish it either fixed or slip float. I often will set it up so I can do either. The line traveling through this tube, the tube diameter is pretty small. You're probably going to have to stick with about a 15-pound maximum ultragreen at the largest diameter that you'll allow that float to slip through. If you run it on a 20, and I did the test out in my lake, it doesn't like to travel through there. It gets the water inside of it, a little bit of friction. So stick with about a 15-pound main line for that float to travel on. Protect it with a bead. And now I'm fishing this is rated. If you look at the package, it's a 3/8 ounce float, okay? If I stick a 3/8 ounce jig underneath it, it rides in the water column okay, but it rides at about, midway down. And I like that float to sit just a little more, so I simply put a 1/8 ounce inline dual swivel, barrel swivel inline sinker, and with a 3/8 ounce jig head and a 1/8 ounce weight underneath it, that float sits perfectly in the water column in the depth that I need it to, and I still have enough of the orange above surface that I can definitely tell when it disappears, okay?
Yep.
It's all about weighting it so that I don't want that float riding in the water somewhere up here. It's going to lay over sideways. It's not going to stay straight up and down, and it becomes an issue when you're mending your line, okay? We want this thing up and down straight so that we can mend the line appropriately. Now, something else I can fish, and it worked very well the other day, I like to use these Torpedo Bomac 5/8 rated float. They have the dual grommets, so it's a very durable float. I like to use these for bees. One, because I'm not throwing a lot of weight underneath the float, and with very minimal weight, with these grommeted ends on it, it draws a line through the float very well. I'm fishing a presentation that is somewhat suspended. not really dragging bottom. And you can do it one of two ways. When I fish beads, I'll use this float. I'll use a single 1/4 ounce inline sinker, and I may run a 6-foot leader all the way to that bead and just fish it a single bead. Sometimes I'll run a 3-foot leader to another inline, it's a 1/32 ounce inline that's also 3 feet above my bead. That just drops that bead down into the water column a little bit more. Either way is just fine. You can fish it with the single or the double, but that weight combination of the 1/8 and the 1/32 is perfect. Now, this float, again, is not going to ride straight up and down the water column. It's going to be at about a 45-degree angle. But again, we're not fishing a complete vertical presentation like we are on the float, so it's okay that lays over a little bit. Take that same float, I want to fish it for a jig. This is rated at 5/8 ounce. I'm going to fish a 3/8 ounce jig head. I put that on. This float's going to lay over on its side. Now, again, I'm trying to present a jig vertically, straight up and down. I want to be able to watch the float riding in the water column. Some guys don't understand why we have different colors on the float. Well, that is so when that float is a distance away from you and it's riding in the water column, you can watch those colors move up and down in the water. You can tell when a fish is starting to mess around with your jig if it's not a direct strike that's going to bury your float. You'll notice that white and orange shows up very well to your eye in telling that something's going on with your float, okay? If it's not weighted appropriately and is laying down sideways and you're fishing a jig, your line mending is all messed up. You're not fishing the jig vertically the way it should be. So, yeah, it's rated at 5/8, but I can tell you this float weights perfectly with a 3/8 ounce inline sinker underneath it, and 18 to 24 inches below that, I'll put a 3/8 ounce jig on there, and that 5/8 float fishes fantastic. Now, here's the confusion. Let's talk grams. What do you know about grams?
I know they're metrics.
Okay.
Metrics sucks.
When I say grams, most people are referring back to their high school or college days, and it has nothing to do with science. So 25 grams is going to be about 3/4 of an ounce. Okay. 35 grams is going to be about 1 1/4. I'll say 3/4 to 7/8, depending on which. You can pull it up. You know, when you go to the store and you buy floats that start spilling out grams, you go, oh, what is that? So you get on your phone and you Google it. It's going to give you a conversion. The one thing I can tell you is that, for steelhead, if I'm fishing this clear drift or this clear float, as we get into these low clear conditions, and I want to get ultra stealthy, I'm going to go with a clear float. And if I'm going to fish a jig underneath it, these clear floats, not only, and I guarantee this, not just because we really appreciate everything Bomac does for us, but I have fished these clear floats, the most durable clear float on the market, hands down. Go buy some of these if you want to have a float that lasts and won't break or leak. Get these clear floats from Bomac. The 25-gram float, fishing a 3/8 ounce jig. I am going to put a 3/8 ounce inline sinker, just like I did on this 5/8 float, and I'm going to fish that 3/8 ounce jig, and it's going to weight that just perfect, okay? There's a lot of air trapped in these floats, so they're extremely buoyant. When it comes to steelhead fishing shangle, I probably will not use the 35 gram. It's just too buoyant. I could actually hang a 5/8 inline sinker underneath that float and a 3/8 ounce jig, and that thing still rides fairly high.
Still can't pull it down far enough.
Yep. So, and if I'm going to use a clear float for bobber dogging, I'm going to stick with the 25 gram because you couple that with a 6-inch stick lead, and it rides perfect. It drags freely. It doesn't hang up. This 35 gram is ideal for float fishing bait for Chinook in low clear conditions. But, it's different materials give you different options as far as buoyancy and how they react in the water column depending what you hang underneath them.
We'll grab a photo of this for those of you who do not have Comcast who are surfing around or riding around in your car right now. We'll get a photo of this and we'll label this so you can check in on this whole thing later. I'm not sure that all of this is necessarily at Sportco yet. The last we talked to Gabe, they were still kind of trying to get everything into the door, but it will be available at Sportco shortly. So
yes,
so head in and take a look. You'll find all this Bomac stuff, very soon at Sportco.
Well, and you've heard me tell people, and it's not just because I hey, just go buy Bomac, because I fish this stuff, and it fishes well. And those that are skeptical about these stick leads and stuff, because you didn't want to make them before, when me and Bill over the past years have been trying to encourage you to do so, buy a couple packs of these stick leads. It will last you the next couple seasons. Give it a try. You got nothing to lose, including the lead.
The Wild Country Pro Cam brought to you by Sportco in Fife and Outdoor Emporium in Seattle. Look for our smiling faces shortly again at the the resuscitated ProCam end cap at Sportco very
coming
soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll kind of step back and do a little bit of a wider global view of Steelhead Nation, courtesy of J.D. Ritchie. He published kind of a cool piece on his blog last week titled 7 Cool Things You Don't Know About Steelhead.
Right.
We'll get the NorCal version of Steelhead Nation when we return to Sports Radio 950 KJR and Comcast Sportsnet Northwest.